let's take a little turn now, because we also wanted to talk a bit about Steiner and astrology specifically. Now, I know you're doing research on this subject and trying to shed more light on Steiner's own personal attitudes to and use of astrology. Could you maybe sketch out what Steiner's relationship with astrology was, what he thought about it, how he used it, and so on?
Yeah, so his overall orientation to astrology is informed by this whole vision of the evolution of consciousness. And it was actually one of the reasons that I was so interested in Steiner initially, kind of arriving at his work through Barfield, because it the narrative of the evolution of consciousness helped me as somebody who was, got into astrology when I was in high school and just like, had those experiences where I'm like, there's something here, there's something real that I'm like discovering through this about the world, and how something like this could be self-evident for human beings in the past, but has come to seem, as Rick Tarnas always says, to be the gold standard of superstition for moderns. That they provide this narrative for understanding how that could have come about. And so for Steiner, like, astrology actually emerges in the course of this gradual fall, as a kind of craft that reflects an increasing attention to the natural world, and a recognition of regularities in the sky that one can track. And so it's like part of this whole process of self-consciousness coming online. There's this phrase, he says, the stars once spoke to human beings. I don't have it up here right now, but basically human beings eventually will speak to the stars that will like reforge this connection. Prior to the scientific revolution, or I guess leading up to it, there wasn't this distinction that we make today, between astronomy and astrology. They were bound up together, and they were really co-arose together out of this need to have a kind of relationship and with the gods, as these intelligences that are speaking through the natural world and the events of life. And so one could say that astrology kind of facilitated the emergence of self-consciousness to the extent that it provided this symbolic representation of the natural world that could allow individuals to get a bit of remove for it, so as to have more agency and negotiate destiny. And so that, facilitates the self-interest, awakening. And, initially it was just used for the king and the state, but, gradually natal charts emerge. And his general orientation, as I've discovered about astrology, which you kind of experience when you get to know the world of anthroposophy and talk to people in it, is that he thought it could be dangerous because he believed, that we are in this process of reincarnation that is directed towards this effort, a kind of education or re-education of humanity, in wake of the fall, a kind of overcoming of our karmic debt of actions that have been undertaken in ignorance of our divine essence and our, fundamental unity with each other. And so the process of reincarnation is all about sort of like redemption for Steiner. And so he says that we have a kind of pre-birth will that orders the events of the coming life such that we will have experiences that will be part of this education of our soul and this process of redemption. And astrology for him is dangerous because it can reinforce the egoistic form of self-interest that is only limited to this particular lifetime. It's when we believe that, this is the only life I have and I only want good things for myself and I want to avoid all the bad things. But he says, actually, some of the like supposedly bad things might have really important significance according to like our deeper, more unconscious, will of our spirit, like that higher, deeper aspect of ourselves. So that was like one of the reasons why he was cautious about it And one thing, just also to mention in connection with this, is that he said only at the end of an occult path does the study of astrology come into consideration. Only then does it become necessary, which is really interesting. And I'll circle back to it eventually. But when you get into anthroposophy, and this is one of the things that excited me about it, the lore and terminology of astrology is like all over it. Like, I mentioned these former names of the cosmic epochs, Saturn, Sun, Moon. They all have, I think he chose them for archetypal reasons, and even says that they have these distant cosmic epochs have a kind of correspondence with the arrangement of the solar system now. So it's a really marvelous vision, and he puts astrology to use in all kinds of different ways, and even uses tropical and sidereal astrology with different applications.
One of them's oriented to the stars, but the other is oriented more to the earth.
So like biodynamic agriculture is very much based on the uneven distribution of the zodiac according to a certain, form of sidereal astrology. So farmers, really focus with their almanacs on celestial influences. And that's also a factor in anthroposophic medicine and the creation of homeopathic remedies. It's also sort of like at work implicitly in Waldorf education in the way they structure the unfolding of the pedagogy, like according to these teachings he had about 7-year cycles, which I don't know if he explicitly links to Saturn, but we can just assume. There's always a kind of like sacred numerology or mathematics going on in anthroposophy. So you could say there's astrology at work there, and they make a big deal about the nodal return and the Saturn return. He also used tropical astrology, so he did an election for the laying of the foundation stone, which was an important moment in the whole world of anthroposophy.
Do you know if he found that election himself? So he was trained enough in astrology to pick out elections, or did he kind of use an astrologer to do that? Do you have any more on that?
Well, I think he chose this one himself. He wanted to lay the foundation stone when Mercury was in Libra, and it was in tropical Libra.
Interesting.
So yeah, and he has this book of verses called the Calendar of the Soul, which essentially is like a way of attuning us to the spiritual process of the light cycle, but he ties them to the tropical zodiac. So it's really interesting. He uses both in different for different contexts. I don't know if he like made any explicit statements about it, but
I feel like it's quite conceivable that they speak to different maybe levels of reality.
And then one more thing that I think is really interesting and unique about Steiner is that he reconciles the sort of archetypal picture of the solar system that we get in astrology, but has been passed down to us from a time when there was not, the notion of evolution had not arisen yet, and so there was more of this sort of eternal conception of the cosmos as eternal. And what Steiner does is he like integrates evolutionary theory and like this archetypal picture of the cosmos in a way that seems pretty coherent. We can't just bring the old back, there has to be some sort of new negotiation of the world, but how? And I think that's one of the exciting things about Steiner's work, is that he provides some possibilities for that. Students would always be like, okay, well, how do these fit together? Like, do the archetypes like evolve into being? Like, what does it mean that there's all these other planets and galaxies? And that's always like a question for students in this program because of these different perspectives that are being offered. And I just have this quote from Steiner from a short essay called On the Relationship Between Theosophy and Astrology.